During the Vietnam War, our family actually had a lot of money because my father and my uncle grew opium far away up in the mountains. When General Vang Pao was drafting young men to join the fight against the communist soldiers, my father and uncle were able to pay a lot of money to other families to have their sons go in our place instead. The young men in our family didn't get to go to war. My father and my uncle would take turns watching the opium farm. My father would go watch the farm for a few days, and then my uncle would switch with him. I remember one day I went with my father to watch the opium farm. When we got there, my uncle and his two sons were already there, and they told us that they had killed a wild hog. They left some meat for my father and me. Before they came back home, my uncle told my father and me to be careful. The other night they heard the cries of the demon Pi Nu Vai, calling and making noises around the edge of the farm. Pi Nu Vai is an intestine-eating demon that lives in the jungle. That day my father and I cooked early before sunset. After that, we went inside the farmhouse and locked the door. The night was eerily quiet. We didn't hear anything. After a few days of us being at the opium farm, my uncle came by himself to watch the farm, so my father and I can come back to the village. After a few days of getting some rest and spending time with us at home, my father went back alone to the opium farm to release my uncle. I remember on the third day of my father being at the farm, my uncle and his two sons came to our house to ask me to go to the farm with them. He wanted to go and release my father at their opium farm. My uncle wanted us kids to carry some stuffs back to the village with my father. He said, some stuff because he didn't want people to hear that they're doing opium. When we got to the farm, my father was nowhere to be found. We stayed around the farmhouse, but after a while, we didn't see my father. We didn't know where he went. We all went looking for him at the edge of the farm and around the area, but we didn't see anything. My uncle said that by nightfall, if my father's not back, we'll head back to the village and have some men come to help us look. That night my father did not come back to the farmhouse. My uncle was worried that Pi Nu Vai might have killed and eaten my father because they had been hearing Pi Nu Vai in the area. The next day we went back to the village. We went to our house first, but my father wasn't there either. He hasn't come home. When my uncle told my mother what happened, my mother started sobbing. My mother wanted to go help us look for my father too. We've gathered some relatives to go and help us look for my father. My uncle didn't want too many people to go because he didn't want them to know that he and my father have an opium farm. Only the very close relatives and my mother went with us. That day when we got back to the farm, it was already dark. My mother was crying a lot at the farm. She kept crying and going around the farm until my uncle's wife, my aunt, went to comfort her and tell her that dinner is ready. I remember that night my mother was crying so much that she didn't have any appetite to eat. The next day we were able to find my father. We found him far up in the mountain and was sitting underneath a tree. The red shirt he wore was all torn. His stomach was wide open with his intestine and internal organs all gone. The relatives and my uncle were saying that it got to be Pi Nu Vai, because only Pi Nu Vai would kill you and only eat your intestine and internal organs. My mother almost blacked out when she saw my father in that state. My mother wants to bring my father back to the village, but my uncle and the relatives said we have to bury him there because it's not a good look to bring him back to the village like that. We dug a hole and buried my father there. When we got back to the village, my uncle and his wife came to talk to us. My uncle told us that even though my father is gone, we still have him. He promised that if one day my mother remarried, he will take us kids in to live with him and love us as his own. He also told us that once the opium is ready, he will sell my father's portion of the opium farm and give us the money. My uncle was a nice man, and he kept his words. After he sold all the crops, he gave us a lot of silver bars. He said he sold the whole farm and did not plan to go back because of the war and because there's Pinuvai up in that mountain. When the American lost the war and they fled Southeast Asia, the Laotian and Vietnamese soldiers kept coming to other Hmong villages to take the men away. When my uncle realized that it's too dangerous to stay in Laos, he wants to take his family to Thailand. Because he's a very rich man, he paid some Laotians to take us and his family to Thailand. He paid the Laotians so much money. The Laotians have trucks to pick us up. But we have to pack up and go down to where the road is, and that's where the truck will wait for us. Since we live up in the mountain, the truck can't get there. So, one night we all packed and left during the night when the villagers are asleep. We walked into the jungle for almost an hour before we got to the road where there was a big truck. We climbed onto the back of the truck, and they took us to where the Mekong River is. A Laotian man sitting on the back with us. He told my uncle that they already set up 2 rafts by the river for us. When I listens to my uncle and the Laotian man talk, I realized that my uncle is actually doing business with the Laotian man. He's probably selling opium to this Laotian man or something. Maybe that's why he trusts that this Laotian man wouldn't betray him. The Laotian man said to my uncle that once we got to Thailand, the soldiers on that side will check us and take away our valuable items, such as our silver bar and gold bars. He suggests that my uncle make some of us kids carry the bars, and also for each of us to put 1 gold bar inside our body until we get to the Thailand refugee camp. That night we got drop off by the Mekong River. The Laotian man said that the part where we got drop off is actually safe because that part is closer to the road, and the Hmong avoided that part, because they're scared that the soldiers might drive by and see them. He told us to stay there overnight, but cross the river before sunrise. That night we stayed there all night by the Mekong River. The river was so scary because it's big and the waves were running wild. We kids were so scared. I remember I was so scared, but my mother said she had already prayed that our Father protects us from this crossing. Before sunrise, my uncle already woke us up. He gave each of us a gold bar and told us to insert them into our body. We all did what he told us. Then he opened some of the bags that his family brought, and they're just full of silver bars. At least 10 times more than what he gave my family after he sold all of the opium at the farm. The adult carried some silver bars too, but they put silver bars around us kids' waist and strap it with a cloth. That morning we were lucky because the river was very calm. There were no waves, and it flowed smoothly. My uncle tied the 2 rafts together with a rope. He and his family were on the first raft, and our family was on the second. I remember crossing the river. It was scary. When we reached halfway, we saw a piece of red clothing flowing down and straight onto my uncle and his family's raft. It got stuck on the side of their raft, and then their raft in front of us just suddenly flipped. All of them fell into the murky water of the Mekong River. Everyone was screaming for help. I don't know if the silver bars were too heavy, but every one of my uncle's sons and his wife sank in less than a minute. We didn't see them anymore after that. I saw my uncle trying to swim back towards us and his raft that was still tied to ours. I stuck my bamboo stick over to him so he could grab it, but I guess his silver bars were too heavy, and he kept swimming, but didn't get any closer. I saw him taking his shirt and all of his bags off. His shirt and bags had a lot of silver bars in them. After that, he was able to swim closer and closer to my bamboo stick. But it was as if something or someone underneath the water dragged him down. He was so close to my bamboo stick, but then he quickly vanished underneath the murky water of the Mekong River. After everyone was gone, my 2 sisters and my mother helped me paddle us across the Mekong. We were dragging my uncle's family's raft alone with us. When we got to Thailand, a truck drove by, and 4 Thai officers were inside. They saw that it was only my mother, 2 sisters, and me. They did not rob us or anything. They gave us some food and took us to the refugee camp, Ban Vinai. I remember that first night in Thailand. My family slept in a big building with other Hmong refugees. Strangely, my mother and I had the same dream of my father that night. In the dream, my father told us that he just came to help us one last time. And he also wanted to make sure that the dragon of the Mekong River takes the person that killed him. The next morning when we woke up, I didn't tell my mother about this dream. It was after we lived in the refugee camp of Ban Vinai for a few months that I told my mother about the dream. My mother was shocked and said she also had the same dream that night. My mother said that even though my uncle was very nice to us, she always thinks that my uncle was the one who killed my father and not the Pinuvai demon. When we lived in Ban Vinai for a while, we heard some Hmong people say that before they crossed the river to Thailand, they've called upon the draconic spirits of the Mekong River. They said to the river, "Whichever Hmong has killed his own people, he shall not be able to safely cross the river. Please take away those who had betrayed and killed their own people." The reason Hmong would put a curse on the river was that there are those Hmong who led the Laotian and Vietnamese soldiers to kill Hmong people in their own village. Too many Hmong have lost their family and loved ones during the attacks on the villages. Even though my uncle did not betray our Hmong people, he is a Hmong man who killed his own brother. He is a Hmong killed Hmong person. Maybe that's why the dragon of the Mekong River took him and his family. Nowadays, when I do research on the internet about the Mekong River and the Laotians' belief, some Laotians also believe that the Mekong River has a dragon in it. They also believe that the dragon in that river doesn't like the color red. If you wear red into the river, the dragon will drown you and kill you. That reminds me of when a red cloth or shirt floated by and got stuck onto my uncle and his family's raft before their raft flipped. Even though we were without a father, we were lucky to have some silver and gold bars when we were in the refugee camp of Ban Vinai. We didn't stay there for long though. We're one of the Hmong families that came early to the United States. To these days, we still have some silver bars we brought with us to the United States. That's all for this video. Thank you for making all the way through and supporting my stories. Have a wonderful day or night.